My name is Margaret, and I'm 67 years old. 3 weeks ago, the final paperwork came through. After 42 years of marriage, I am officially no longer someone's wife. The lawyer's office smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. I signed my name, my full name, the one I was born with, and walked out into a Tuesday afternoon that looked exactly like every other Tuesday afternoon I'd ever seen. Except I was different. Except I was free. I need you to understand something right from the beginning, before you make assumptions, before you fill in the blanks with the stories you've heard before. There was no affair. Not on my part, not on his. There was no abuse, no raised hand, no cruel word that cut so deep it left a scar you could see. There was no screaming match, no dishes thrown, no dramatic moment where I packed a suitcase in the rain while he begged me to stay. People expect that, don't they? They expect the big reason. The justifiable reason. The reason that makes sense in a single sentence at a dinner party. Oh, well, he cheated, or, oh, well, he had a drinking problem, or, oh, well, there was financial betrayal. Something clean. Something that ties up the confusion with a bow. But my story isn't like that. My story is uncomfortable precisely because it's quiet. Because it's about something most people don't want to look at directly, the slow disappearance of yourself inside a life that looks perfectly fine from the outside. We were still cooperating when I made the decision. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table we'd eaten 10,000 meals at, and we discussed the division of retirement accounts. We talked about the house, whether to sell it or whether he'd buy me out. We were civil. We were, in that moment, probably kinder to each other than we'd been in years, because we finally had a shared project again, the dismantling of our life together. I had the date circled on my calendar for months. Not the date I decided to leave, that was quieter, more gradual, but the date the mediator said we could finalize everything. I looked at that circle every morning when I opened my planner to check what needed doing. Doctor's appointment. Grocery shopping. Haircut. Marriage ending. By every measure that society counts, I was lucky. I know that. Believe me, I know that. 42 years with the same man. A man who never cheated, never hit me, never gambled away our savings or came home drunk or disappeared for days without explanation. A man who went to work every single day for 4 decades and brought home a steady paycheck. A man who fixed things when they broke, who showed up at every school concert and every graduation, who helped me take care of my mother when she got sick. We had enough money. Not wealthy, but comfortable. The kind of comfortable where you don't panic when the car needs new tires or the furnace goes out in January. The kind of comfortable that lets you sleep at night without the anxiety that kept my parents awake for their entire lives. We have 3 children. All grown now, all doing well. 2 of them have given us grandchildren, for in total, ranging from 3 to 14. At holidays, our house was full. At birthdays, we gathered. We looked, from every angle, like we'd done it right. And my husband, Richard, was respected. By his colleagues, by our neighbors, by the parents of our children's friends. He coached Little League for 6 years. He organized the neighborhood watch. He was the kind of man people trusted with their garage door codes and their spare keys. I know how this sounds. I know that walking away from all of that, at 67 years old, seems incomprehensible. Ungrateful, even. Selfish. Our friends, the ones we've had for 30 years, the ones we vacationed with and celebrated with and mourned with, they were shocked. Genuinely shocked. Not the polite kind of shock where people pretend to be surprised but you can tell they saw it coming. Real shock. The kind where their faces went slack and they stammered and they said things like, "But you two seemed so solid," and, "But you're almost 70, and, but what about the grandkids?" One friend, Susan, someone I've known since our kids were in elementary school together, she took me out for coffee 2 days after I told her. She held my hand across the table, and she said, with genuine concern in her eyes, "Margaret, don't you think you're too old for this? Starting over at your age, wouldn't it be easier to just, make it work?" Make it work. As if I hadn't been making it work for decades. As if making it work wasn't precisely what had brought me to this point. My daughter-in-law asked me, privately, if I was having some kind of crisis. A late-life crisis, she called it. Like there's an expiration date on realizing you're not happy. Like at a certain age, you're supposed to just accept whatever life you've built and ride it out until the end. The judgment is different when you're older. When you're young and you leave a marriage, people rally around you. They talk about new beginnings and finding yourself and you deserve better. But when you're 67, they talk about you like you're confused. Impulsive. Going through something. They use words like unnecessary, and at this stage, and too late. And I felt that judgment inside myself too. Don't think I didn't. Every single day, I questioned whether I was making a terrible mistake. Whether I was throwing away something precious because I was being unreasonable or too demanding or unable to appreciate what I had. The guilt was enormous. The guilt of disappointing people. The guilt of disrupting the family structure. The guilt of admitting that the life I'd built with my whole adult self wasn't enough anymore. But here's what I need you to understand, this didn't happen suddenly. There was no breaking point, no moment where everything shattered. It was a slow fade. So slow that for years, I didn't even notice it was happening. The relationship didn't collapse. It thinned. Like ice getting thinner and thinner each spring, until one day you step on it and realize there's barely anything there at all, just the memory of solid ground. I can't point to a specific year and say, that's when it started. But somewhere in our 30s, maybe our early 40s, the way we touched each other started to change. It became less frequent. Less intentional. We used to reach for each other in the kitchen, used to find excuses for contact. A hand on the small of the back when passing. Fingers brushing when handing over a coffee cup. The kind of touching that says, I want to be close to you. That disappeared gradually. So gradually that I couldn't have told you when the last time was. It just became normal not to touch except when necessary. A peck on the cheek in the morning. A pat on the shoulder. The kind of touch you'd give a colleague or a cousin. And the conversations changed too. We used to talk about ideas, about dreams, about things we wondered about. We used to tell each other stories about our days, not just the facts, but how we felt about them. What made us laugh, what confused us, what we'd been thinking about on the drive home. Somewhere along the way, our conversations became functional. Logistical. Who's picking up the dry cleaning? What time is the appointment? Did you call the plumber? We became managers of a household instead of partners in a life. I didn't see it happening because it happened so slowly, and because everyone around us was telling us we were fine. Better than fine. We didn't fight. We didn't have drama. We were stable, reliable, a good team. And we were a good team. That's the thing. If marriage is a project, raising children, building financial security, maintaining a home, showing up for family obligations, we were excellent at it. But somewhere in the middle of being excellent at the project, I stopped being a person to him. And he stopped being a person to me. I became a role. The wife. The mother. The organizer of holidays and the keeper of schedules and the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and bought the gifts and made sure the house was presentable when people came over. He became a role too. The provider. The fixer of things. The steady presence. The man who could be counted on. But we stopped seeing each other. Really seeing each other. Seeing the person underneath the role, the one with private thoughts and private hungers and private loneliness. I remember a moment, it must have been 5 or 6 years ago, when I was getting ready for bed and I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. Just a regular Tuesday night. I'd washed my face and was brushing my teeth, and I looked at myself and thought, when did I become invisible? Not to the world. The world still saw me. My children still called. My friends still invited me to book club. The cashier at the grocery store still smiled at me. But to him. To Richard. I had become so familiar that I'd disappeared. He looked at me and saw the furniture of his life. Necessary, functional, but not something you really look at anymore. And I'd done the same to him. I'd stopped seeing him as a man with an interior life. I saw him as the person who needed to be reminded about the dentist appointment. The person whose shirts I folded. The person who sat in the same chair every evening and watched the news. We were living parallel lives in the same house. Coordinating. Coexisting. But not connecting. And the terrible thing, the thing that made it so hard to recognize, is that it felt like peace. After the chaos of raising children, after the financial stress of earlier years, after the intensity of building a life together, this felt like we'd finally figured it out. This felt like maturity. Like we'd moved past the need for drama or passion and into something more evolved. I actually told myself that. I told myself that what we had was deeper than passion, more meaningful than excitement. We had partnership. We had history. We had a shared life. But partnership without intimacy is a business arrangement. History without connection is just time passing. A shared life where you don't actually share yourself is loneliness with company. For years, I tried to fix it. I tried so hard. I suggested counseling when I was 60. Richard went with me because he's a reasonable man who does what needs to be done. We sat in a therapist's office for 6 months, every other week, and we talked about communication and expectations and childhood patterns and all the things you're supposed to talk about. The therapist gave us homework. Date nights. Conversation starters. Exercises to rebuild intimacy. And we did them. We went to dinner once a week. We asked each other the questions from the list. We tried. But you can't manufacture connection with effort alone. You can go through the motions. You can check the boxes. But if the want isn't there, the genuine desire to know and be known, it's just performance. I read books. So many books. About love languages and attachment styles and how to affair-proof your marriage and the 7 principles of making marriage work and how successful couples fight and how to keep desire alive and on and on and on. I did the work on myself too. I went to therapy alone. I journaled. I examined my expectations and my resentments and my role in the dynamic we'd created. I lowered my expectations. I told myself that maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe the problem was me, my dissatisfaction, my restlessness, my inability to appreciate what I had. I talked to other women my age, women who'd been married even longer than I had. Most of them said some version of the same thing. That's just how it is after this long. The passion fades. You accept it. You build a life on other things. And I tried to accept it. I tried to believe that contentment was enough. That safety was enough. That after a certain number of years, you're not supposed to expect your spouse to still want you in that hungry, urgent way. You're not supposed to ache to touch them. You're not supposed to feel like there's something vital missing when they're near you but not with you. I tried to make peace with the idea that this was as good as it gets. That I should be grateful for what I had instead of mourning what I didn't. But my body wouldn't let me lie to myself forever. I started having trouble sleeping. Not the normal trouble of getting older, I know about that, everyone my age knows about that. This was different. This was lying awake at 2 in the morning with a weight on my chest, feeling like I couldn't breathe deeply. Feeling like I was trapped. I was tired all the time. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. The kind of tired that's about carrying something too heavy for too long. My back hurt. My shoulders hurt. My doctor said it was arthritis, and maybe some of it was, but I also think my body was literally folding in on itself. Trying to take up less space. Trying to shrink down to fit into a life that had become too small for me. I lost interest in food. Everything tasted flat. I cooked the same meals I'd been cooking for 40 years, and they didn't taste like anything. I stopped reading. I, who had always been a reader, who always had a book on my nightstand, couldn't focus on a page for more than a few minutes. The words just sat there. Nothing went in. I felt like I was disappearing. Not dying, I wasn't dying. But fading. Becoming less vivid. Less here. And the worst part was that no one really noticed. Because I was still doing everything I was supposed to do. I still showed up. I still smiled. I still made the Sunday dinners and remembered to send the birthday cards and asked appropriate questions about other people's lives. I was functional. Functional and hollow. There was a moment, I remember this so clearly, when we were at our grandson's birthday party. He was turning 7. The whole family was there, crowded into my son's backyard. Kids running around, adults standing in clusters talking and laughing. It was loud and warm and full, and I was standing there with a paper plate in my hand, and Richard was across the yard talking to our son-in-law, and I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing. Not anger. Not resentment. Not even the dull ache of disappointment I'd grown so used to. Nothing. And that's when I knew. That's when I knew that something in me had fundamentally changed. Because love, even love that's faded, even love that's become mostly habit, it still feels like something. Even if it's complicated or painful or tired, it's still a feeling. But what I felt when I looked at him that day was the emotional equivalent of looking at a stranger in line at the post office. Neutral. Blank. Just another person in the world who had nothing to do with me. Except he wasn't just another person. He was my husband. The father of my children. The man I'd shared my entire adult life with. And I felt nothing. That night, after we got home, after we'd both gotten ready for bed, we lay there in the dark on our separate sides of the mattress, the same sides we'd claimed 40 years ago, and I thought about the fact that we hadn't touched each other, really touched each other, in years. Not sexually. That had ended so long ago I couldn't remember the last time. It had tapered off after my youngest was born, became increasingly infrequent through my 40s, and then just stopped. And neither of us had brought it up. We just let it fade away like it was an embarrassing topic neither of us wanted to address. But I'm not just talking about sex. I'm talking about touch. Affection. The brush of fingers. A hand on my arm. His body close to mine on the couch. Any gesture that said, I want to be near you. We'd become roommates. Polite, cooperative roommates who'd known each other for a very long time and had a shared interest in keeping the household running smoothly. And I realized, lying there in the dark, that I didn't want to die like this. I didn't want the rest of my life, however many years I have left, 10 or 15 or 20 if I'm lucky, to be this. This quiet, functional, emotionally empty existence where I go through the motions and pretend it's enough. I didn't blame Richard. I want to be very clear about that. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't withholding or cruel. He was exactly who he'd always been, steady, predictable, well-intentioned. A good man by any reasonable standard. He'd been raised by parents who believed that love meant providing and protecting. That if you worked hard and paid the bills and didn't cheat and didn't drink too much and showed up when you said you would, you were doing your job as a husband. He thought we were fine. He genuinely thought we were fine. When I first tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, this was years before I decided to leave, he looked at me with genuine confusion. He said, but we don't fight. We get along. What's the problem? And I tried to explain that the absence of conflict isn't the same as the presence of connection. That you can have peace in a marriage and still be deeply lonely. That I needed more than just coexistence. But I didn't have the right words. And he didn't have the framework to understand what I was trying to say. To him, it sounded like I was manufacturing problems. Being ungrateful. Making trouble where there wasn't any. He said, and I remember this exactly because it hurts so much, Margaret, we've been married for 35 years. This is what marriage looks like after 35 years. You're romanticizing something that doesn't exist. And maybe he was right. Maybe what I wanted, to be seen, to be desired, to feel alive in my marriage, maybe that doesn't exist after 35 years, or 40, or 45. But if that's true, if that's really true, then I didn't want to stay married. I tried so hard to want what I had. I tried to reshape my expectations, to find fulfillment in other parts of my life, to accept that marriage after a certain point is just about companionship and shared logistics. But I couldn't make myself believe it. I couldn't make myself believe that it was greedy or unreasonable to want to be touched with intention. To want to be asked how I really am and have the person actually wait to hear the answer. To want to feel like someone was choosing me, every day, not just staying with me out of habit or obligation or the sheer inertia of 40 years. We went to counseling. I mentioned that already. But what I didn't say is how much it hurt to sit in those sessions and watch the therapist try to explain to Richard what I needed, and watch him nod and say he understood, and then watch absolutely nothing change. He'd try for a week or two. He'd ask me more questions. He'd put his hand on my shoulder when he walked by. He'd suggest we go for a walk together. But it was conscious effort. It was him checking items off a list the therapist had given him. It wasn't organic. It wasn't because he wanted to. It was because he'd been told he should. And I could feel the difference. I could feel that it was work for him, that he was doing it because he was supposed to, not because something in him reached for me. After a few weeks, he'd slip back into the old patterns. And I'd slip back too, because it was easier than constantly asking for something he didn't seem to naturally want to give. I kept thinking that maybe if I waited long enough, if I was patient enough, if I worked on myself enough, something would shift. Some door would open and we'd find our way back to each other. But years passed and nothing shifted. We just got older. We added grandchildren and retirement planning and new medications to our list of shared concerns. But the fundamental emptiness between us didn't change. I started having these thoughts, terrible, guilty thoughts, about what it would be like if he died. If I became a widow instead of having to make an active choice. How much easier that would be. How people would gather around me and tell me how sorry they were and what a good man he'd been, and I could nod and agree and grieve and no one would judge me. But he was healthy. In better health than me, actually. His family lives into their 90s. And I'd lie awake and think about another 25 years of this and feel like I was suffocating. Is that awful? Is that the most selfish, terrible thought a person can have? Probably. But I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you what it's really like, not the polite version. And the truth is that I started to feel like I was waiting to die. Like my real life was over and all that was left was this long, quiet decline into old age, side by side with someone who didn't really see me anymore. I went to my annual physical when I was 65. My doctor, a woman about my age who I'd been seeing for years, asked me the standard questions. Was I sleeping well? Was I exercising? Was I experiencing any pain? I answered honestly. No, not really, and yes, everywhere, all the time. She ran some tests. Everything came back normal. Blood work fine. Blood pressure a little high but nothing alarming. Physically, for my age, I was healthy. She sat back in her chair and looked at me, really looked at me, and she said, "Margaret, how are you?" Really? And I don't know why, but that question, asked in that specific way by that specific person in that sterile examination room, broke something open in me. I started crying. Not delicate tears. Ugly crying. The kind where you can't catch your breath and your whole body shakes. She handed me tissues and she waited. When I could talk again, I told her. I told her I was tired all the time. That I felt like I was disappearing. That I was married to a good man and I had a good life and I knew how lucky I was, but I felt like I was dying inside. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't tell me I was being dramatic or that I should be grateful or that this was just what getting older felt like. When I was done, she asked me one question. If you knew you had 10 years left to live, would you want to spend them like this? 10 years. Not an unreasonable estimate for someone my age. Maybe I'd have more. Maybe less. But 10 years seemed, in that moment, like both a long time and no time at all. 10 more years of sleeping next to someone who felt like a stranger. 10 more years of conversations about nothing that mattered. 10 more years of being lonely in my own home. 10 more years of pretending I was fine when I felt like I was barely here. And I knew the answer. Immediately and certainly, and with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. No. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life like this. But knowing that and doing something about it are two different things. Because I was 65 years old. 65. Retirement age. Grandma age. The age where you're supposed to be settling into the peace of your later years, not blowing up your entire life. Everyone my age had stayed married. Everyone. Even the ones who were obviously unhappy, even the ones who barely spoke to their husbands, even the ones who took separate vacations and slept in separate bedrooms. They stayed. Because that's what you do. Because at this age, what's the alternative? Start over? At 65? Live alone? Navigate the terrifying world of being single when you haven't been single since you were 23 years old? And what about the practical concerns? The financial realities? We had retirement accounts. A house. Social Security benefits that were calculated based on 42 years of shared income. Health insurance through his former employer. A carefully constructed financial plan that assumed we'd be splitting expenses for the rest of our lives. Leaving meant disrupting all of that. Meant lawyers and accountants and dividing assets and trying to figure out if I could afford to live on half of what we planned for. It meant telling my children that I was leaving their father. Watching their faces as they tried to understand. Watching them struggle with whether to take sides, whether they were allowed to be angry with me, whether this changed their entire understanding of their childhood. It meant Christmas would never be the same. Family gatherings would be awkward and complicated. I'd be the grandmother who broke up the family. The fear was enormous. Paralyzing, some days. There were mornings I'd wake up and think, this is insane. I'm being ridiculous. I should just stay. It's not that bad. Other people have it so much worse. But then I'd go through another day of the quiet emptiness, another day of pretending, another day of feeling like a ghost in my own life, and I'd know I couldn't do it anymore. I talked to my therapist about it for months. Months of cycling through the same questions, the same fears, the same guilt. Was I being selfish? Was I asking for too much? Was it fair to leave him when he hadn't done anything wrong? My therapist, bless her, she was patient with me, kept bringing me back to the same point. You're not leaving because he's bad. You're leaving because the marriage is making you disappear. Those are two different things. But people don't understand that distinction. People want clear villains and victims. They want a reason that makes sense in a sentence. Why did she leave? Oh, because he was terrible. That, people can understand. But, why did she leave? Because she was lonely even though he was perfectly nice, sounds like a personal failing. Like she's broken or ungrateful or incapable of accepting reality. I called my sister, my younger sister who lives across the country, and told her I was thinking about leaving. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, Marge, you're almost 70. Why would you do this now? Just coast. You've made it this far. Coast. Like my life was a car rolling to a stop and I should just take my hands off the wheel and let it happen. But I didn't want to coast. I wanted to feel something. I wanted to matter to someone. I wanted to be awake for however much time I had left. The decision, when I finally made it, wasn't a lightning bolt moment. It wasn't dramatic. I was sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. Richard was reading the paper. I was drinking coffee. The sun was coming through the window. Everything was quiet and peaceful and exactly the way it had been 10,000 Sunday mornings before. And I thought, very clearly and calmly, I don't want this anymore. Not in anger. Not in pain. Just a simple statement of fact. I don't want this anymore. I waited until that evening. After dinner, after the dishes were done, in the living room where we'd had every serious conversation of our marriage. I said, Richard, I need to talk to you about something important. He muted the television and turned to look at me, and I could see in his face that he knew. Maybe he'd known before I did. Maybe some part of him had been waiting for this. I said, I can't do this anymore. I need to leave. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." We talked for hours that night. About the practical things mostly. The house, the money, the logistics. How we'd tell the kids. How we'd divide things. He asked me, at one point, if there was someone else. I said no. He asked if he'd done something wrong. I said no. He said, "I don't understand. I thought we were fine." And I said, "I know you did. I know." There was sadness in that conversation, but there was also, and this might sound strange, relief. On both sides. Like we'd both been holding our breath for years and finally we could exhale. The next few months were hard. Telling the children was brutal. My oldest son was angry. My daughter cried and asked me to reconsider. My youngest, always the peacemaker, tried to understand, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. They asked questions I couldn't fully answer. They wanted concrete reasons, specific incidents, something that would make it make sense. But how do you explain slow starvation to people who've never been hungry? How do you make them understand that you can be dying inside while everything on the outside looks fine? I told them I loved them. I told them this had nothing to do with them. I told them I wasn't asking them to choose sides or understand completely, just to trust that I needed to do this. My daughter-in-law stopped speaking to me for 2 months. Some of the grandkids were confused about why Grandma and Grandpa weren't together anymore. There were awkward conversations and hurt feelings and a sense that I'd betrayed some unspoken contract. But I also started to feel something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was. Relief. Real, physical relief. Like I'd been holding a boulder over my head for years and I'd finally been allowed to set it down. The day I moved into my own place, a small 2-bedroom apartment, nothing fancy, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and I cried. But they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of grief mixed with something that felt terrifyingly like joy. Grief for the 42 years. Grief for the young woman I'd been who'd believed she was building a forever love. Grief for Richard, who I did care about even though I couldn't stay married to him. Grief for the family structure we'd had and would never have again. But also joy. Actual joy. The first I'd felt in years. I woke up the next morning in my new apartment and I made coffee exactly the way I liked it, strong, with real cream, without having to make it the way Richard liked it. I sat by the window and I read for an hour without anyone interrupting me or needing something from me. Such small things. Tiny, insignificant freedoms. But they felt like my life coming back. I started noticing things again. The way the light changed throughout the day. The sound of rain. The taste of food. Colors seemed brighter. Music sounded better. I felt more present in my body, more aware of being alive. I started taking walks every morning. Not for exercise, though that was part of it, but just to be outside, moving through the world, belonging to myself. I joined a book club. A real one, not the one I'd been part of for years where we mostly just drank wine and gossiped. A book club where we actually discussed the books, where people had passionate opinions and we debated ideas. I took a watercolor class. I'd always wanted to paint but I'd never made time for it, and when I'd mentioned it to Richard years ago he'd said it seemed like a waste of money. I reconnected with an old friend from college who'd moved to a city 2 hours away. We started meeting once a month for lunch, and we talked about our lives with an honesty I'd never been able to access in my marriage. She'd been divorced for 10 years, and she told me it was the hardest and best thing she'd ever done. I won't pretend it was all easy. There were lonely nights. There were moments of panic about money. There were times I questioned everything and wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But even on the hardest days, there was a difference. I was lonely, but I wasn't empty. I was scared sometimes, but I wasn't hopeless. I was alone, but I wasn't disappearing. And something surprising happened with Richard. After the initial shock and hurt, after we'd settled into our new reality, we started talking again. Really talking. More honestly than we had in decades. Without the pressure of trying to be married, without the weight of all those unmet expectations, we could just be two people who'd known each other for a very long time. He admitted that he'd felt the distance too but hadn't known how to fix it. He said he'd thought that if he just kept doing what he was supposed to do, providing, being present, being dependable, that would be enough. I told him that he wasn't a bad husband. That the problem wasn't that he'd failed at something. The problem was that we'd become a habit to each other, and I needed more than habit to feel alive. He didn't fully understand. I could see that. But he respected it. And that respect, that acknowledgement that I had a right to choose my own life, even if it hurt him, meant more to me than all the years of dutiful partnership. We're civil now. Kind, even. We co-grandparent. We show up for family events and we're polite and we don't make the kids choose. We found a way to be separate that's healthier than the way we were together. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I've found some great new love. I haven't. I might never. At 67, the dating pool is pretty small, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to dive into it. But I've found something better than romantic love. I've found myself. I've found the version of me that isn't defined by being someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's grandmother. The version that has opinions and desires and curiosities that belong to me alone. I've learned what I actually like, separate from 40 years of compromise. I've learned that I prefer mornings to evenings. That I like classical music and documentaries about nature. That I'm happiest when I'm learning something new. That I need solitude the way some people need socializing, not all the time, but regularly, to feel like myself. I've learned that desire doesn't have an expiration date. Not sexual desire necessarily, though I'm not ruling that out either, but desire in the bigger sense. The desire to experience things. To grow. To be surprised. To feel deeply. I thought that at my age, I was supposed to be settling. Accepting. Making peace with a quiet decline. But I've learned that settling is its own kind of violence. That accepting emptiness doesn't make you mature, it makes you smaller. That peace that comes from giving up isn't really peace at all. For 42 years, I defined love as steadiness. Predictability. Someone who showed up and did their part and didn't leave. And those things matter. I'm not saying they don't. But they're not enough. Not for me. Not anymore. Love, real love, is presence. It's someone seeing you, really seeing you, the person you actually are, not the role you fill, and choosing you anyway. It's wanting to know what you're thinking about. It's touching you because they want to feel close to you, not because it's on a list from a therapist. Love is being chosen, every day. Not just staying out of obligation or habit or because it's too much trouble to leave. But actively choosing. Actively wanting. And if that kind of love isn't available, if the person you're with can't give that or doesn't want to, then I think you have to ask yourself a hard question. Is the love you have enough? Can you live with it and still feel alive? For some people, the answer is yes. And that's fine. That's their choice and I don't judge it. But for me, the answer was no. I couldn't spend the rest of my life in a relationship where I felt invisible. Where touch was rare and functional. Where conversation stayed on the surface because going deeper felt like too much work. I couldn't keep pretending that safety was the same as happiness. That companionship was the same as connection. That I should be grateful for what I had instead of grieving what I didn't. Some of you watching this, some of you listening to me, you're in marriages like the one I left. You're not in crisis. There's no emergency. Everything is fine. And that's exactly the problem, isn't it? Everything is fine. Fine and empty and quietly suffocating. You don't have a reason to leave that would satisfy other people. No one would blame your spouse if you told them the truth. You'd sound ungrateful. Difficult. Like you're making problems where there aren't any. But you're dying inside. You know you are. You can feel yourself getting smaller, quieter, less vibrant. You're going through the motions and telling yourself it's enough and wondering why you're so tired all the time, why food doesn't taste like anything, why you can't remember the last time you felt excited about something. You don't need permission to want more. You don't need a crisis to justify leaving. You don't need your spouse to be a villain for you to admit that the relationship isn't giving you what you need. Fine is not the same as good. Absence of conflict is not the same as presence of love. And staying because there's no good reason to leave is a terrible reason to stay. You don't need to wait for something dramatic to happen. You don't need to wait until you're so depleted you can't function. You don't need to wait until you're even older than I am, lying on your deathbed thinking about all the years you spent in a life that didn't fit. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to choose yourself. I know how hard it is. I know about the guilt and the fear and the judgment. I know about the practical concerns and the financial worries and the way everyone will look at you like you've lost your mind. But I also know what it's like on the other side. And I'm here to tell you that it's worth it. Not because everything is perfect now. It's not. I still have hard days. I still worry about money. I still have moments of doubt. But I'm awake. I'm here. I'm present in my own life in a way I haven't been in decades. I matter to myself again. My thoughts matter. My feelings matter. My desires and preferences and opinions matter. I'm not just the background of someone else's life. I'm the main character of mine. People talk about courage like it's this big, dramatic thing. Courage is running into a burning building or standing up to injustice or making some grand sacrifice. But sometimes courage is quieter than that. Sometimes courage is admitting that the life you've built isn't the life you want, even when everyone is telling you that you should want it. Sometimes courage is choosing the unknown over the comfortable, the possibility of loneliness over the guarantee of emptiness. Sometimes courage is disappointing people. Being misunderstood. Being judged. And doing what you need to do anyway. Staying in a marriage takes courage too. I'm not saying it doesn't. Staying and doing the work and fighting for connection when it would be easier to leave, that's brave. But staying when you know it's not right, when you know you're dying inside, when you're doing it out of fear or obligation or because you can't imagine an alternative, that's not courage. That's surrender. Real courage is honesty. Honesty with yourself first, and then with everyone else. Honest about what you need. Honest about what's not working. Honest about the fact that you get one life and it's shorter than you think and you don't want to spend it pretending. I'm 67 years old. Depending on genetics and luck, I might have 10 years left. I might have 20. I might have 5. However much time I have, I want to spend it awake. Present. Feeling things. Mattering. I wasted too many years, and I say wasted knowing how harsh that sounds, trying to make a dead thing grow. Trying to manufacture connection where there wasn't any. Trying to convince myself that I should be satisfied with scraps. I'm not wasting any more. I'm not angry anymore. I was, for a while. Angry at Richard for not seeing me. Angry at myself for staying so long. Angry at a culture that tells women to settle, to compromise, to be grateful for whatever love they can get. But anger is exhausting and I don't have energy for it. What I have now is peace. Real peace, not the fake kind that comes from avoiding conflict. Peace that comes from knowing I'm living my truth, even when it's hard. Even when people don't understand. Even when I'm scared. I have gratitude too. Gratitude for the years Richard and I had, for the children we raised, for the life we built together even though it ultimately wasn't sustainable for me. Gratitude for getting out before I completely disappeared. Gratitude for having enough years left to build something new, even if it's just a life that feels authentic to who I actually am. I have no regrets. Not about leaving. The only regret I have is that I didn't do it sooner. That I spent so many years trying to make myself smaller to fit into a space that was never going to be big enough. If I could go back and talk to myself at 60, or 55, or even 50, I'd say, don't wait. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the right reason or for him to change or for the kids to be older or for retirement or for some sign from the universe. If you know, you know. Trust that knowing. Your life matters. Your happiness matters. The way you spend your days matters. And you don't owe anyone, not your spouse, not your children, not your friends, not society. You don't owe anyone a life you don't want to live. It wasn't too late for me at 67. It's not too late for you, whatever age you are. Too late is dying with your real life still locked inside you. Too late is looking back and realizing you spent your precious years being someone you weren't, wanting things you never asked for, living half alive. That's too late. Leaving at 67? That wasn't too late. That was right on time. I want to hear from you. I want to hear from the people who stayed and found a way to make it work. I want to hear from the people who left and rebuilt. I want to hear from the people who are still sitting on the fence, still trying to decide, still wondering if they're crazy for wanting more. I want to hear from the older people especially. The ones my age and older. The ones who've been told their whole lives that at a certain point you just accept what you have. Because I don't think that's true. I don't think there's an expiration date on wanting to feel alive. On deserving to be seen. On mattering. This isn't just my story. It's the story of anyone who's ever felt like they were disappearing inside a life that looked fine from the outside. Anyone who's ever been told they should be grateful while they were quietly suffocating. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not ungrateful or unreasonable or asking for too much. You're human. And you deserve to feel alive for however much time you have left. So tell me your story. Tell me what you're struggling with. Tell me what you've learned. Tell me what you wish you'd known sooner. This is a space for truth. For the complicated, messy, inconvenient truth that doesn't fit into neat categories or comfortable narratives. We're done pretending. We're done performing. We're done making ourselves smaller to make other people more comfortable. We're here. We matter. And it's not too late. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to come alive.